The night lay heavy on the hill above Flatwoods, and the beam of a single flashlight shook as boys and a tired mother climbed through weeds that slicked their jeans. A dog trotted ahead, barked once, and then yelped so sharply it turned and bolted back down the slope. The air smelled wrong, hot metal, oil, something sour that burned the nose and eyes. Up near the crown of the ridge, a red light pulsed behind the trees like a warning buoy where no water stood. When the light faded, a shape rose in the brush, taller than a man, broad in the shoulders, and wrapped to the ground as if it wore a dark, pleated garment. The face glowed reddish inside a pointed cowl. Two bright eyes held still in the beam, and long arms hung forward with clawed hands. The thing hissed, the sound wet and mechanical at the same time. Everyone ran. The day had begun with ordinary work and a sky the color of tin. At sundown on September 12, 1952, a fireball crossed West Virginia like a thrown spear, slow enough that people in towns and farmsteads all along the hills watched it travel and called neighbors to ask if they had seen the same streak. In Flatwoods, brothers Ed and Freddie May saw it dive behind the ridge above the old Fisher place. A friend said he had watched something fall there. The boys ran to tell their mother. Kathleen May listened, looked toward the ridge, and said they were not going up alone. She rounded up two of the boys' friends and found Gene Lemon, a lanky National Guardsman who could carry a lamp and keep order. The last light was going fast when the little party left the street and cut through the schoolyard toward the pasture. They expected wreckage, an airplane maybe, or a brush fire that needed a bucket line. Cows turned their heads as the group slipped through a gate. Lemon swung the flashlight, hunting a path through sumac and broomstraw, and found a shallow fog pooling in the low spots. The fog came with an odor like scorched metal and sweet oil. It stung the eyes and put a taste on the tongue. Somewhere ahead, a small red light blinked, steady for a few seconds, then gone, then back again behind the trees. They stepped into a clearing and the world changed speed. Lemon's beam caught the eyes first, two hot pins set in a round, reddish face under a spade-shaped hood. The rest of it resolved a heartbeat later. A tall body wrapped to the ground, not like cloth exactly, but like plates, as if the thing wore armor that flared at the base. Long arms reached out before it, ending in claw-like fingers. It did not walk so much as glide. The hiss came again. Lemon shouted and stumbled backward. The light skittered off the face and found the pleated skirt, and somebody screamed. The party broke and ran. They did not stop until the brush gave way to the schoolyard. Lemon bent double and fought the taste of metal while the younger boys stared at the hill as if it might stand up and follow them. Kathleen May kept a hand on her son's shoulder to make sure he still stood there and had not slipped away in the dark. When they could talk, they told what they had seen in different sentences that agreed on the bones of it. Tall, cowl or hood, glowing eyes, long arms, a smell like acid and oil, a sound like steam. The dog never came when they called. Word spread the way it always did in a small place, fast, doubted, repeated anyway. Sheriff Robert Carr and a reporter, a Lee Stewart Jr. of the Braxton Democrat, drove out and took the group up the hill again. The red pulse had gone. The mist had thinned to a sour thread caught in the grass. Stewart's light picked out torn brush, marks in the dirt, and a patch of crushed vegetation, as if something heavy had settled and then lifted. Everyone's eyes watered until they had to angle their faces away from the ground to breathe without choking. They marked the spot and came down, not much wiser and no less shaken. By morning, the account had a life of its own. The local paper printed what Stewart saw and what the May family told him, and a larger paper up the road took the story and let it stretch. The figure reached 10 feet in one telling, 15 in another. The dress became armor. The hiss became breathing like a pump losing prime. A school assembly paused so a teacher could tell children to stay away from the ridge. Cars lined the lane by sundown. Strangers asked where exactly the boys had stood and where the eyes had first flashed. The town tried to get on with its chores around the questions. Something else settled in that did not fit a carnival tone. Several in the party felt sick. Eye irritation lingered. Throats burned. The younger boys came down with headaches and nausea that kept them home from school. Kathleen May told a reporter the doctor said it looked like exposure to an irritating gas. Lemon kept quiet, but when he described the moment the beam found the face in the hood, his hands shook. He said the thing moved toward them without moving its legs, and that the sound it made did not belong to an animal he knew. The United States Air Force kept files on exactly this sort of night. Project Blue Book gathered reports ranging from the mundane to the impossible and treated them all the same: dates, times, maps, statements. An officer passed through, listened to the people who were there, and wrote it up. Fireball over the state at sundown, red light on the ridge, odor like burned metal, eyes and throat irritation, figure in a cowl, party fled. He did not call it a monster and did not call it a ship. He called it a sighting, noted that a bright meteor had been tracked across several states at the very hour the boys ran uphill, and folded the file. People who worked the land offered simpler answers that satisfied some and angered others. Maybe it had been a barn owl perched low, they said, throwing back eyeshine when Lemon hit it with the light. Owls hissed. Spooked and half-opened wings could look like a cape. A bird on a limb above brush, seen through fog by scared people breathing fumes, could swell in the mind into a giant. Others said a warning beacon blinked on a distant radio tower and slashed light through the trees in a way that turned fog into something alive. A few brought up balloons, skyhook research rigs or weather gear, drifting where they had no business. Still others shook their heads and quoted scripture about things in the heavens we did not know. Kathleen May stood her ground. She said she had seen a face framed by a dark cowl and arms that ended in hands not meant for tools. She said that when she closed her eyes, she could still see the brightness of the eyes and the pleated plates down the body. She was not a woman who played at tales, and she had no desire to be famous. The boys did not back away either. They had no need to impress anyone. They had been terrified. That stayed simple and true. Reporters arrived with city shoes and polite smiles and asked if anyone had taken a picture. They quoted a man who claimed strange lights moved up the valley on foggy nights. They found Lemon on his porch and pressed for details meant to stretch headlines. He repeated what he had already said and then stopped talking. The town learned the rhythm of being looked at by outsiders who believed small places wanted to be famous. Flatwoods wanted its evenings back. Autumn carried the story into colder rooms where people argued for sport. A young mother said the sickness proved something had burned in the clearing. A mechanic said headlamps would have lit the fog the same way. A teacher brought out a chart of meteor paths and gave a talk at the diner while coffee cooled. In church, the sermons bent toward the difference between fear and awe. Hunters said the ridge kept its smell for weeks when the weather trapped air. More than one man said the metal taste came back when he reached the crushed patch and kicked at the dirt. With time, the sharp edges wore into legend. A hand-painted sign appeared on the highway and promised a monster. A craft shop sold little figures with spade hoods and long arms. A festival sprouted. The thing that had terrified children began buying school uniforms and paying for a new roof. People told the story the way you told any campfire piece, with beats that timed a good shiver. They left out the part where a dog refused to go forward. For the few who had climbed the hill in the first place, the part that stayed was not a costume or a logo. It was the way the air changed just before the light found the face. It was how quickly an ordinary evening turned wrong in a single second. It was the stack of explanations: owl, beacon, balloon, meteor, that accounted for everything, and somehow not for the feeling of being watched by something that did not care whether a family understood it or not. On a night in 1952, a group of neighbors had gone to check a ridge for a brush fire and came back carrying a story that refused to decide for them. The path up the Fisher place grew over. The cows forgot the visitors. A boy became a man, moved away, and came back years later to stand in the schoolyard with his own children. He told them to look at the ridge and listen. A freight train blew its horn in the valley. Far off, a red light winked between branches and then went out. He told them the hill had once held a moment when the dark felt crowded, and that some stories stayed not because they were tidy, but because they would not sit still long enough to be solved. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.